faces, so I feel inclined to say that my name is Saskia Mostij. I am the proud director of the International Architecture Festival of Rotterdam, which is my second year, which means two biennials, one about time and one about nature, and maybe they're basically intertwined, or at least cyclical, let's say. Before we go to the third panel, I felt that it would be good to maybe sketch out a few things on what we've been talking about during the day. And before I do that, I wanted to introduce, for some of you this is again, but I feel that I want to introduce again this conversation on where are we now as a practice? Where do we stand? And I myself am also an educator. I'm teaching at the Design Academy, and I run a master called Critical Inquiry Lab, which is as vague as it gets, right? But basically, Joseph Grima, that some of you may know from his office Space Caviar, invited me in 2000, just on the cusp of the planetary pandemic, to start a new master's. And I thought, what would I want to learn as a youngster? Understanding that the world as we know it is in serious decline. Yet, in my conversations with my now co-head Patricia Reed, a thinker, writer based in Berlin, we talk a lot about this notion of maybe a world is declining. And this day is about what that implies for architecture and, of course, what that implies for architecture education. And when we say thinking about a world, okay, I'm just going to keep on going. Could it be, would you mind starting the little... Patricia Reed draws on the conversation. Oh, yeah. Am I doing anything wrong? I think...
Should go now.
Fantastic. Oh, God has a voice. Fantastic. Well, the shift was made to a world, drawing on Sylvia Wynter's thinking of man one and man two. And if we think about the lens of man one and man two, it's not a gender question. It's about who have access and who do not. And we're very quickly going through a lot of images, and I'm sorry that the credits just fall off, but you just saw mold. Sorry, Tatjana, there are credits there. You have to take me on that. And picking up on this notion of the polycrisis, we are here to talk through the questions we are fundamentally facing, not so much on how we build, but with what we build, with whom we build. And this project is a collaboration also with the Architecture Academy in Amsterdam. And I'll introduce you further later, Jana, but maybe can you come forward as one of the people that thought through with myself and Lily Carr, who I'll ask in a second, why was it so important to have an education symposium? And would you maybe sort of emphasize 2 or 3 things that you heard during the day that really impacted your thinking?
All right, that's a lot to do at 7:36. Okay, so yeah, Nature of Hope is the exhibition, of course, to which we are relating this symposium. I think while working on the exhibition, what really came into play and kind of was really lighting up everybody's energy was how much transformative practice there is already out there, and how many practitioners are already not only imagining but actually pursuing a practice in the design domain in a different way, and in a way practicing a future version of where we are to the most part today. Yet at the same time, it felt a little bit disassociated if we didn't talk about education. And there are a number of projects in the exhibition that are by students, with students, recent graduates, and so on. But we felt that that wasn't enough. And I think through that, we really tried to understand, like, how do we get the conversation going a little bit further? One lecture, we didn't feel that was balanced, and that's why we kind of set out on this slightly marathon-esque format. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for being with us for so long. Thank you for whoever is giving up their Friday evening to be here. But I think the important thing is that Education is so fundamental, and there is so much that we still don't understand, and that we need these conversations and these alliances to bring it a step further. So in a way, it's just a stepping stone from the exhibition to the work that's already out there, and giving it a little bit more generous space in the programming of the exhibition. And you wanted to say a summary of 2 things, right?
Yeah, well, maybe I think this is already really beautiful. Lily Carr, you are the conceptualizer of the... Yeah, come over. Yes, to see. Yeah. Well, it's good to have a face to a name, no? Maybe some basic premises on how and why you started sketching out. For those who were not there, we talked about architecture in a post-growth world, and after that we talked about nature of knowledge, so questioning very much the idea of what is in fact knowledge. We talked about tacit knowledge, the land. We talked about different language systems, different literally how we situate our conversations in space. I like the term flipping the classroom. We talked about that there's a huge orientation on process, not so much maybe the object. Just to toss a few things in, but why or where did you ground this particular program?
Well, I think Jana already spoke to that a little bit. I think when the premise of the program is really saying business as usual can't go on, so we really need to think about what we're doing as architects and spatial practitioners, but also what are the tools that we're learning in academies of architecture. When you're questioning everything, where do you start? And as Jana said, one voice isn't enough. And so the purpose of this was to bring together as many voices as we could from the people that we found sort of working and toiling, often alone, in their institutions, trying to change things from the ground up. And I think in the last session, one of the really beautiful things that came out of the discussion was the importance of learning not to receive knowledge and master it, but to kind of build knowledge as a kind of community of practice, like knowledge, practice as building a community of knowledge. And I think, by bringing together as many voices as we could today, this is what we sort of hope to sort of do, sort of within the small context of this symposium, but also to spark conversations that hopefully kind of spill out from this room.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Give it up for Lily Carr, please. So from that, we actually move to this part of the conversation, which is knowing and doing, so how the practice, in fact, talks back. So I'm very appreciative of the speakers, and this panel will be moderated by Jana Bijstrik. She is an architect, writer, filmmaker, educator, and also seriously in the lead of this curator's attempt to sort of present a garden of hope, if I may call it that, with all its perspectives, and indeed how to perceive a discipline that is in transition and a practice that follows. So please, Aya, and writing a book on play, who would have thought? Keep your eye out. Please give it up for Jana Bijstrik.
Thank you very much. Sasha, do you mind if I unplug you for a second? Sure. Yeah? Can I just close it? Yeah? Okay, cool. I was a little bit... so we're good. Okay. Saskia, thank you for a beautiful introduction again. What a pleasure to close this day, a beautiful day of so many wonderful thoughts that have been shared on a conversation that is, I think, a little bit closer for me as being somebody who's both in practice and in education at the moment, and to talk about this relationality between practice and transition. I will take a few minutes to kind of frame the conversation. Then I will give a short intro of how this relates to the exhibition. And then I will introduce the speakers. So please bear with me, and then we will get to the exciting part of actually hearing the speakers. So just to start out, I think we're in a very interesting profession as architects, as designers, as landscape architects and urbanists, because unlike many professions, our the kind of our worlds of education and profession are actually quite far apart, I would say. Our practice is very dominated by the market forces, by economy, by so much more than what we are able to influence directly. While our education realms and our academic realms, as we heard today, is of course immensely broad. And it seems to be only getting broader at the moment. And that is not to say all the relationalities that we're building with social sciences, with exact sciences, with economists again, but also in our own expressions of theory and history, talking about other than human perspective that is really coming into play at the moment, and so much more. And so the way I would like to propose to frame today's discussion is what kind of relationship are we looking for between these two worlds that are quite different, and I think we can go beyond saying quite different, quite starkly different, and to actually say, like, what kind of relationship do we want? For those in the room who are practitioners, what is your perspective? For those in the room who are academics, what is your perspective? And is it a relationship that we want to be closer? This was part of the discussion that was slightly touched upon in the previous conversation. Or do we actually enjoy and need this diversity at the moment and should actually nurture that diversity and not cater to the needs of the industry and the market? Because who drives the change? Is it the practice or is it education? Is it both? And where is the balance there? So these are some of the questions I would like to address with the wonderful panel that will be joining me in a second. Before I introduce them, I would like to go through a few other moments of how we got here. I am the head of a master's program at the Academy of Architecture in Amsterdam, where I got an amazing opportunity to launch the work on our own climate curriculum, but that was already stepping on the work and building on the work that was already ongoing. So this is an image from 2021, comes quite some time ago. We're a tiny school, so compared to the other huge organizations and institutes being represented here today, we are, of course, small, versatile. We live in our own reality, a very sheltered reality, I would say. But so we embarked on our own journey of what is a climate curriculum, and I guess some of that you will hear from me in my questions today. But I think kind of bridging that reality and the exhibition Nature of Hope, this diagram has been kind of the root of many conversations we've had as curatorial team, as the educational team at the Academy. Some of the students who are here will know it very well. So this is a diagram that was put together by IPCC and IPBS when they first met that same year, 2021. So IPCC is the International Panel for Climate Change of the UN. IPBS is also a UN panel, but for biodiversity. And so when they met, the aim was to set out the impact of the actions from the perspective of climate, so the responsibility and the domain of IPCC, versus the actions of on biodiversity. And what you see here in this very illegible diagram is actually that on the left-hand side, so these are the climate actions. If we project the climate actions on biodiversity, you see a lot of red lines emerging, which means that at the moment, the way that the actions are formulated by the respective government actually have a negative impact on our nature and our environment. While if we flip the logic and we say we start with biodiversity actions, you actually see that majority of it remains blue, and that means by formulating our policy, by formulating our ambitions from the perspective of biodiversity, maintaining biodiversity, restoring biodiversity, we actually also achieve a lot of climate actions and ambitions that we have to achieve. This is not to keep it very theoretical, but I think the point here is that there is really something shifting in the awareness also on policy level in relationship to nature. So this is a diagram by Alex Putzer. A version of this also exists in the exhibition. And he started to monitor how many rights of nature actions were actually taking place across the world. And there was really a start of a curve in 2006, which continued to grow. So right now, across the world, there are around 500 legal bodies that represent nature, which in itself, okay, it's a fact. But at the same time, that means that there is, in jurisprudence and also in policy world, there is really a shift happening, and that we, in a way, as designers, are potentially catching up to that shift. We are standing in one example. The new institute is a ZOOP with a representative who speaks for the living, Maaike van Stiphout. And so that is kind of, I think, an important thing to be aware of, that we as designers also have to respond to that new reality that is emerging around us. This is a diagram. I think Katja already had to leave, but so this is a diagram that was put together by Alex and Katja Schechter, who also spoke earlier today, advocating that we have to be very much aware of the dualisms where we exist today. So this diagram here, it really maps out 70, there are many more, of all kinds of cultural dualisms that exist in Western culture of how we perceive nature. Beautiful, ugly, tame, wild, reliable, unreliable, and so on. And many authors have written about it. And this is not a critique of the authors or the work, but rather to build awareness of how we relate to nature, and that it's very much on this distancing and this is us, this is them kind of narrative of nature culture. And so in that, of course, embedded, and which is very much the narrative also of the exhibition, of how do we shift away from this carbon capture, carbon calculation, which you see on the left, afforestation project, versus forest restoration project, where we really start to understand the landscape in their entities, in their relationalities, not only to us, but also amongst themselves. Bringing it back to architecture, I think there is a lot of enthusiasm in architecture in the Netherlands, but also other parts of the world with things like cross-laminated timber, CLT. But where do those trees come from? We are not surrounded by forests that can sustain this production. Even a place like Vermont is not a place, because that is a biodiverse forest and not a monocultural forest, which also exists. And so one of the authors of this new publication, another legible diagram, is Kiel Mo. And what they're looking at is how can forest management actually be a production of certain type of timber that goes into production of houses. And so this is what is happening here. So if we analyze the forest in its constituent part, and then we think of what we actually need to produce and get that into the cycle of maintaining that forest as a production, where would that bring us? And what kind of practice are we building rather than just creation of more and more materials? And I think there's a lot that is already known about the different types of materials and where we're going with this. But I think what we have to keep reminding ourselves, and also in education and in practice, is when we talk about timber, where does the tree come from and how much of that tree are we using? So at the moment, only 12% of an average tree is actually used for a lifespan of more than 50 years. This is also a work in the exhibition. If we increase that number to 40% or 50%, we are getting into the realm of the forest has space to regenerate. An important shift to make. Another work in the exhibition is the work of Jane Hutton on the reciprocity of landscapes and what we produce in cities, how are we affecting the landscapes behind them, and Kiel Mo, which you probably saw on your way in. And so in the exhibition, we very much try to articulate and stage projects and actions and thinking and production of architecture that is going beyond the transitional mode of we are getting better, but not quite better, and making that step to transforming the practice. Some of our workable diagrams throughout the year of producing this exhibition, the many shifts that we are surrounded by, and where we want to be, where our buildings are part of a timeline. And now for the awaited part of the evening. I will be joined by three fantastic speakers, educators, students, as part of this conversation. First, we will hear from Tatjana Schneider, a professor at the Institute of History and Theory of Architecture and the City at the Technical University in Braunschweig. the author of multitude of publications and initiatives across Europe on the agency of architecture in many forms and experimental practices, and the founding member of multiple alliances, of which also Mold is one, and they have a beautiful, beautiful work in the exhibition. Tatjana, may I invite you?
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm joining everyone and thanking all of you for having me, yeah, for still being here to the audience. I think I want to start with a couple of words to do with also that distinction that's been made between academia and practice, right? For me, I'm in academia, you could say, and I'm usually introduced as someone who is an educator, but this kind of thing is my practice. No? So education is my practice. This is something that I live and breathe in a way. I move on to, I think, my slides. What you can't read so well, maybe, and what's been mentioned already, and I think we'll talk about this more when we're done, is sort of this kind of thing, what we do also as educators. I work at a very big technical university. I chair history and theory, so I'm one of 17 professors, sort of building physics, to building history, to design studios as well. So what we do is in the realm of history and theory. So in order to actually team up with people that that maybe think in a similar manner, I join networks also. And one network in particular is really interesting, which is the Partisan Design Network, which we founded about 2 years ago, which is a network of like-minded people from arts and architecture contexts who look at practice, but also teaching and how teaching can support the multiple transformation processes that we encounter, but with a very strong focus on, well, you could say, communities. And the other interesting network is in Germany, we don't have ACAN, I think, at the moment, but we have Architects for Future, which is a very, very strong network. And we've recently founded a network of people in education sort of clustering together. And I think that's really interesting in Germany too. It's a big sort of university landscape. I want to continue the conversation about architecture. And when I talk about architecture, I mean architecture as a profession, as a discipline, as a field, as a pedagogy in the face of climate breakdown. And I will do so by focusing on a recent project. And Jana mentioned it already, and Saskia already showed the diagram that I will be alluding to as well. Architecture is Climate, which began live a few years back in the form of a research grant application with Jeremy Till. We both submitted it to the German Research Foundation, which is called DFG, and the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK. And what we did at the time was we argued that the systemic changes required to avoid complete ecological collapse also need to be accompanied by reimagined forms of architecture. So we heard quite a lot about architectural practice in a way, but what is that kind of practice that we might need in the future? What does it look like, and is that kind of practice that surround us at the moment, is it the one that we want to take into the future, or is it actually something that might have to be invented afresh? And central to this is, and it continues in many ways, lines of questioning going back also to spatial agency, other ways of doing architecture, was or is the question about architecture, what architecture actually is, and what it might have to be. And I mentioned that already. The work, and I think we've had much too little time to talk about our respective educational environments. I think this afternoon, I think it would be really good, and I think Lily did this when she looked at the climate curricula, and you looked at this at the Academy of Arts as well, because we have hugely differing educational system. Whether you look at the Netherlands, the UK, you look at Poland, at Germany, we have different systems, and I think we have to do justice to these systems as well. Maybe we can unravel some of that later on. But in Germany, we have quite an unreconstructed system in a way. We have, I mentioned that already, 17 chairs, and I am one of those chairs, and under me there's like this tirage of sort of other people who work for me, but don't have the same rights that I have. But much of that work, and this is what this slide is about, this is my work in Braunschweig. It's a tiny part of the architecture curriculum. The students do, out of the 180 credits they do in their bachelor's degree, they only have to take 5. 5 are compulsory in history and theory, and they might do another 5, but they could also do them in building history. So it's a tiny, tiny part. So just to put that in context. We do lots of other stuff in order to increase the volume, but on a master's level, they don't have to do history and theory altogether. And I think this is also really important to talk about. So embedded in wider frameworks, this is my framework in Braunschweig, rooted in very, very broad alliances. Technical universities, so a real tanker, but I'm also beginning to treasure the tankers quite a little bit because tankers are slow as well. And I think there's also some kind of strength in slowness, right? Because you can't just overturn them and topple them quickly, but they're there and they will be there for another while. And this is a little bit our mission statement. So the chair, my institute, which talks about the need to understand better the world we're living in by understanding how it has come about and how we, people anchored and entangled in violent and extractivist systems, can configure, make other trajectories and imaginaries. And I think we talked quite a lot about that already. So our methods are multiple, and I think we've seen some pictures already, and some people have talked about that as well. And it's quite the things that you see at the moment. We walk quite a lot. We situate ourselves in our cities as well, and the cities we visit. We have lots of situated encounters. We work with local initiatives. We work with people who try to affect climate change also in our cities. We draw futures with people together in the public. We do a lot around interlinking divergent pieces of very thin descriptions, as well as trying to contextualize those transitions. Now, the image that appeared in the background here is sort of coming to that kind of historic lens that I'm keen to bring into this. Now, historic lens about who's been shaping space, and this is let's talk about this clearly, and I think many people have done so a little bit already. Imperialist undertakings, elitist clubs of men of religion, men of military, men of business, men of even more business, men of politics, and some architects too. And they're looking inward, facing each other, right? And this is what this painting by Natascha Ungeheuer, it's from 1972, actually talks about. And this is moving already into the present, just to say, this is not just some distant past, right? It still surrounds us, as much as we would not want it to be there. But the men look a little bit more friendly. They're not as stern as the ones, and not as gray as the ones in the previous painting. But when before it's these. They were sort of inward-facing and sort of these in these impenetrable rooms and throwing these dice in order to decide where things and people go. So we have them now out in the open, but they do the same thing effectively. And they paint pictures of growth in very jolly manners for former, but now flailing industrial superpowers. They talk green steel, and they talk hydrogen, and they talk battery factories and electric cars, and that's me coming from Lower Saxony, where epicenter of Volkswagen. So I'm right in the heart of the beast in a way. They talk expansion and they talk trade, and as the many struggles and the many things that we see also in this exhibition here, struggles for climate and spatial justice around the world show, this is totally lopsided, right? So this story is not all there is to is. And architecture is climate, so the project I want to talk about a little bit longer, and someone has to stop me maybe in 5 or 6 minutes or something, or 7 minutes, no? Okay, because I look at it and keep it. So it takes on this context, or these contexts, it's multiple. And also the argumentative acrobatics around it. And I think we've heard a lot about words during the day, and how we need to look at the words we use and be careful about them as well. But there's so much stuff. We talked about greenwashing. I don't need to go on about this. Green growth, building as panacea. In Germany, you have this housing crisis, and we need to build to get out of the housing crisis, as if ever in history a housing crisis was solved by building more. fucking hell, no. No? And the team of researchers, and I'm talking Jeremy Till, and I'm talking Christina Sarifi, who's here in the audience with me. There's Sarah Bovelit, there's Anthony Powers, and Becca Völker. We looked at those entanglements, past and present, and we try to unravel these kind of foundations also of current violent entanglements. We looked at sort of interpretations and try to look at historical and current connections between architecture and the roots of climate breakdown. Now we talk about practices that envisage nonviolent productions of architecture in space, and then we also talk about futures, not in a prescriptive manner, but in the form of prompts that are meant to serve processes of doing and making. I come to those in the end. This work does not exist in a vacuum. Many authors have been mentioned already today, but we're indebted, like many others, to the work of many scholars, contemporary but also not so contemporary any longer, from the field of critical spatial practice, anthropology, feminist geography, and so on and so forth. So going forward, I want to focus on the practices part of this work, the practices part of architecture is climate, which we see as a source also for the reimagined architecture that stretches beyond the self-defined boundaries of architectural norms and maybe also the architectural canon. No? So I'm talking, when I use the term architecture, I don't talk about the traditional architectural practice that exists at the moment, but sort of architecture as a very broad field of spatial imagination. So nothing that just designs void or designs containers, but something that is really fundamentally about spatial relationships and interdependencies, right? So these practices that we collected, and you saw a glimpse of that in the slide prior to that, they're mapped against the conditions they attempt to counter. So we have a lot of stuff around us that is going not so well. And we found many practices that attempt to do something against us, try to come up with other bits and pieces that counter these this violence around us. And in a nutshell, this is what you see in this diagram. A large scale version is in the exhibition next door, and it's a critique, of course, of the things that architecture is really good in pushing aside, what it's really good in ignoring and exploiting and all these other bits and pieces. But what you also see here are these wide expanses, these wide rifts, the things that push through the blackness and the darkness and all that stuff that sort of has accumulated over many years. And these white gaps, these rifts, which we sometimes call them, they are in a way the kind of hopeful bits in this history of ours. And it's practices, it's other forces that are not in sync, that counter this kind of business as usual or do not perpetuate business as usual. So what does non-business as usual mean? So this is website bit where you see this is the practice entry, and here it talks a little bit about what these practices are, and it's very clear in its very first sentence. It says this is not about architecture as you know it, and it's really important to say that because architecture as we know it. And maybe couldn't play devil's advocate here, is absolutely obsolete. We do not need it any longer. We need something else. We need something else altogether, because the practices that we know it, and they've been too complicit in a way to actually be reformed. And I put that out as maybe as a hypothesis, and we can talk about it. I don't know whether I believe it at all, but this is where it goes. So I zoom in a little bit, and this is then a long list of these kind of things, and I don't know, Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have any kind of practice that has a name in the title. I think it's quite a lot of organizations, quite a lot of principles, it's quite a lot of policy documents, it's other bits and pieces which try different ways of doing. The thing that it does, it's foregrounds, processes, ethics, actions that are directly and productively dealing with climate breakdown through various forms of organization, governance, and collaboration. And it situates architecture, future architecture, in a broad field beyond the technocratic solutionist approaches that dominate current architectural approaches in relation to climate and much more. Now, and you can zap through this on your own. I've put a couple of things together which not just to illustrate the breadth of this thing, climate action networks as a field of practice, no? Right? Yeah, I think I'm going quickly through this, no? And here I mapped onto this big black thing because each of those examples is then described, basically mapped onto this diagram, trying to explain how they counter the conditions they face, the center of land use interpretation, and I think I would basically by documenting extractivism, and they're all examples, I think, for future, they're already there, they're not just examples for future practices in the field of architecture, but they are already there now. So it's already practices that we can learn from and look at and see what they do. No? So I've put together a couple of examples that are also a little bit more concerned with building, the 2000 Watt Society, which is obviously played out also in quite a lot of housing cooperatives in Switzerland. There is the Environmental Justice Atlas, basically a piece of research, which is, as we call it here, cartographies for resistance. So it's building up the knowledge base for the kind of actions that we also need. No? There is Deutsche Wohnen enteignen, so a massive referendum that sort of came out of citizen action to do with the expropriation of large housing firms like Deutsche Wohnen and Vonovia and others. There is the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people, just as an example for situated encounters, situated storytelling, political writing around notions of climate change and who builds your architecture. And we know these kind of things as well. And maybe people in the room know that as well. No? And I think there's plenty of others which are globally and sort of it's a big resource. No? There's 150 of them, and in each of them there's multiple mentions of other bits and pieces. So it's not like we can say they don't exist, right? They do exist. They're there. They're up for the taking. We just have to go there and look at them, talk to them, and the future is already here. The future has already arrived, and I think this is what we have to do. We have to look at them and basically work with them and sort of also work with their knowledge. I have 2 more minutes, if that's okay. Yeah? Okay, good. And I have to find my last thing here, which will take me the 2 minutes to find, I think, which I just asked for. Okay, good. I think it's here, my final slide. I want to get back to education, which is in some way obviously where I started. Remember the ampersand that you saw, and I will do so by with this sequence of prompts from the Architecture's Climate Project will play in the background. It's a cloud of stuff containing detailed explanations linked to relevant practices. There's also, in some cases, things to do, so exercises, if you wish. They are meant to support all of us in making choices for viable futures in the face of climate breakdown. So the world is clearly on fire, and I think we've seen all of that. Let's remember, buildings are infrastructures, as infrastructures are financialized objects. They're investments for the few. Rotterdam is a prime example, I think, in many parts for this. Speculative objects, they're pension insurance, they're immense resource guzzling apparatuses, and all this has not been a secret for a very long time. The consequences here as elsewhere are unmistakable, obvious, impossible to explain away. And there is a bit of a turn in many schools of architecture in recent years. So we moved from cooperation to competition to cooperation, and timber instead of concrete, and more conversations of around exciting stuff. We talk about care instead of ego. We talk about lots of solar panels and ground source heat pumps and community gardens and maybe slightly smaller footprints in our buildings, and the list goes on. What we argue with this project, however, is that this does not nearly go far enough, not by a long shot. And one of the reasons really important decisions are made not on the architect's drawing board, but in other arenas. And I'm not proposing that architects suddenly need to become politicians, anthropologists, sociologists, or economists. What I do think, however, is that it's important for architecture to understand its field, the interdependencies between architecture and space and labor, climate, and infrastructure, knowledge, and culture. It's important to acknowledge the need to connect, to take a stance, and I'm talking ethics here, to stand in solidarity with others, work with networks that fight all violent productions of and reproduction of space. And while it's crucial that we build up that knowledge about this doing otherwise, it is also equally important to finally lose patience and shift gear. So that's me.
Tatjana, amazing. Thank you for that. I think education is my practice is going to resonate for a few days with many people in the audience. Please save your questions. Don't forget them. We will get to them in a minute. But now I'd like to introduce Emma Deal, already trained as a landscape architect, part of the architectural team with the municipality of Amsterdam, currently also a master's student in architecture at the Academy in Amsterdam, and is independently working on a project with Studio Grit, with the support of Built by Nature, on a fantastically inspiring narrative of what is happening in Paris today. And I think you're going to tell us a bit more about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and what a challenge to take the stage after Tatjana. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really insightful. What I'm going to tell you about tonight is the project I'm going to tell you about tonight is a research that I've been conducting for, wait, how should I start? Oh, okay. Research that we've been conducting for 1.5 years onto the growing movement around bio-based material that's happening currently in France. It's a project that I do in collaboration with Crit architect, Christina Eickmeyer, who invited me to collaborate on the project, which I'm really grateful for, as we share the same passion for the materials. And this project was commissioned by the Dutch Urban Agenda with the idea of organizing a study trip to Paris, where we found quite a lot of projects featuring those materials, and that's why the research is focused on this area. So this movement comes in reaction to the impact, the growing awareness on the impact of the building industry on the climate, and bio-based materials are seen as materials that offer a tool against the carbon, the footprint of current buildings, and the materials that we've been focusing on are straw, hempcrete, raw earth, and timber, as they are the ones that we've seen a lot in the project. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, this is the map of Paris that you don't see so well, but we have now around 100 projects around Paris that are featuring those bio-based materials. And I will tell you a little bit more about the different materials. So to start with straw, straw is a bio-based is a byproduct of agricultural sector, as you know. And France being the biggest cultivator, one of the biggest cultivator of grains in Europe, there's a significant potential of insulating buildings with it. And the professional rules that kind of give the legal framework to use straw as a building materials were already formalized in 2012. So by now we actually have more than 10,000 buildings in France that are insulated with straw, of which a lot of them are actually public buildings. A notable trend that we see for the past 10 years actually is the building of school with straw, insulated with straw. So here you see 3 projects, 2 already built and 1 under construction. I will come back on this example of the straws a little bit later in the presentation about the schools. Sorry. France is also a big producer of hemp. It's not the same amount of the volume, the production volume of straw, but it's actually, it already has quite a significant potential in terms of insulating housing with it, and the professional rules that gives it the status of a building material were already formalized in 2014. Hemp is usually used in the form of hempcrete, which is mixed with lime and water, which is projected onto the wall to insulate it. And we see already bigger housing projects using this material as an insulation material already since 2014. I put this project in, it's a little bit more recent because this one was quite of a milestone project, as it was the first highest building with nine layers insulated with hempcrete. And hemp is also really interesting to use as material for renovation. So here's a historical building in the city center of Paris. What's interesting is that those two buildings are social housing, and it's good to note actually that the social housing corporation in Paris, which are still public in France, actually took on this pioneering role into really imposing the use of hempcrete as an insulation material in housing projects. Raw earth is also a very interesting material in the material transition that's now necessary. It's not bio-based, but it can be sourced very locally, and it needs very little processing. So it's actually, it has a very low footprint, and what we can see now is that there's quite a growing trend amongst architects to use excavation ground from the site or from the local surrounding as a building materials in the project. So as most of the biggest metropole, Paris has millions of tons of excavation ground per year, produces a lot of excavation ground per year. And this company, Cycleterre, is the first company around Paris that uses the excavation ground to turn them into building materials that can be reused in the project. Two projects that I would like to illustrate this with. This is a social housing that has a facade that's built with rammed earth blocks that are prefabricated and mounted on site. And the second one is a kindergarten in the city center of Paris. Wood is more widely known, so I will go a little bit faster around it, but on it. But there's two things I think that are quite interesting to say. Because it's a grown material, it captures CO2. So as a structural material, it has a particularly low carbon footprint compared to the conventional structural materials. And it also brings different properties that conventional materials don't have, such as its lightweight, its strength, its flexibility. And I would like to illustrate this with two projects. This project on your left was only possible with wood, as it is built on a existing concrete slab above the peripheric. So it was only possible with using wood because of the lightweight. And this is the project featuring quite spectacular hanging roof structure of the aquatic center that was built for the Olympic Games. I would like to focus a little bit more on the example of the schools, as I think it really highlights the different involvements of the whole chain of stakeholders. This is really a milestone project for the school and for the building with straw. This is quite a big school. It's 5,000 square meters, and it was insulated with 6,000 straw bales. And this project started in 2009, so before straw was actually recognized as a building materials. And a team of architects and engineers took on the role of leading the test to be able to use straw as a building material for this school. So they managed to get public funding, but it was not covering the whole cost. They actually decided themselves to pay with part of the money that they were getting for the project to pay for those tests. They donated the fire tests, actually. You can see them there. It consists basically on building piece of the facade one-to-one, setting it on fire and see if the fire gets worse because of the straw. So the tests were concluent. And they decided to donate those tests to the public domain. And those tests were actually used by a lot of schools afterwards to be able to use straw. So they actually led to the formalization of the professional rules of straw afterwards. So that I thought that really illustrate this, bring this importance of the bottom-up initiatives and the support from public institutions. And actually, in the past 15 to 10 years, we can see a lot of those types of experiment testing initiatives that actually grew and that also are responsible for this, let's say, like upscaling phase that we're now in with the bio-based material in France or around Paris. This is Rosny-sous-Bois. It's a small municipality next to Paris, and where political ambition kind of supported the team of municipal architects, which were actually 2 at the time, who took on the challenge to build all the new schools that the city would need in the most sustainable ways. So 15 years later, they have built 5 schools. 1 is under construction. And with every project, they really challenge their ways of doing, where they source the materials. They only work with local wood only where it's really needed. So for the structure, they fill in the structure with fibers, mostly straw. They always experiment also with like low-bearing straw, as you can see. They use clay plasters, or raw earth blocks. They also involve the local communities, the kids also in the construction process through workshops to really involve them in the construction process. And the reason why the school became such a topic and is getting so much attention is there's actually 2 reasons. The first one is that the school is really seen as an education tool. The building of the school really becomes an object of education. Anybody can understand what wood, where wood comes from, how it's grown, how the material is sourced, and what function it can have in a building. And the same for the straw, and the same for the clay. The architecture is not anymore the sort of private domain of the architect, of the experts that are the only one that can actually see through all the materials of a facade. It can be really explained from the kids to the elderly to anybody. And that's really one of the main focus that is done through this whole movement with the schools. You can see in a lot of the schools that we visited, there's this, they call it the window of truth, where the insulation is shown actually, and so with this educational purpose for the kids. The second reason, it's for education, but it's also for health reason. Bio-based buildings offer a much better air quality. The materials have properties that filter the air, that regulate the temperature. So there's also sort of concern for the health of the children being there, the people working there. So so in a way, further than being an object of education, it also becomes a mean of education by creating the right condition to learn, as it's been also proven that the right quality of air really creates better concentration levels for kids, less stress. So that's where I'm at. I will leave it to this. If you're interested in all those practices, we've been collecting a lot of information on a lot of projects that also are in the installation that we've made in the exhibition. And the idea is really to get into those projects and really learn from them, look at all the different types of practices, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you for giving so many insights and also kind of very tangible conversation on what is already out there. I realized I didn't mention, we have to miss Federico Savini this evening. Unfortunately, he fell ill and lost his voice. So we have to imagine the conversation on circular metabolism as opposed to circular economy and have that conversation at a later date. So apologies for that. We hope he gets well soon. And now to our last speaker, Sasha Glassel, trained as an architect, but has practiced in so many ways and taking the architectural profession into unexpected and maybe expected new terrains in relationship to technology, commoning, community building, forms of ownership, and other topics also in relationship to nature. Co-founder of Space and Matter, and many more companies who maybe we will touch upon during the discussion. Sasha, could you tell us your narrative? You're using this?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thanks for your presentation also. Very inspiring. I didn't know that so much good stuff is going on in Paris. Where to start? I was teaching in the past, also in Aachen, for 4 years, master students, and I didn't do that since, I think, 9 years anymore, because I was really focusing on practice. I love the challenges of the real world. I really love all these endeavors with like financial people, economics, municipalities, like all this difficult stuff. And I think what I was doing also when I was teaching, I always challenged the students to just come up with these utopian projects of like really changing the system. But all of a sudden I was a bit bored by only looking at this paperwork, and I thought it was really good to get more like insights and experience in how to realize this stuff. So I have more than 3 companies. That sounds silly, but it's a lot of fun. Space and Matter is our core company. Like we started 15 years ago with an architecture firm, and but what I want to talk today about it is our parallel system, because we start basically like every year with a new idea, and we often start then immediately in your company and see if we can just play a little bit around. Yeah, this were the 3 founders 15 years ago, but now there worked, I think, more than 200 people in our companies, like over the years. And now we're not 200 people at that moment, but like we had a lot of people coming and going. We figured out very fast, actually, and I think that was really interesting also to the picture you showed before with this like white privileged man in suits, that when we won the first competition, which was 15 years ago, we received like a very prestigious prize, an idea competition, which we won in the northern part of the Netherlands. And we received it in Cannes at the MIPIM, which is like this developers fair. And we realized that architects were really not making the cities. At that moment, we figured out that there were no architects, only developers and city people. And we thought we have to learn a little bit how to get more power towards us in order to change systems. So we started in 2017 a common city development, our own project development company. And we did that by learning and looking really carefully at the people where we hired, we rented a desk from. So we didn't go with our architecture friends into an office, but we rented an office in a real estate company for project development. And we really learned carefully from these guys, how do you develop projects? We had so many ideas at that time. Basically, we didn't have that diagram yet, but 15 years ago, we were focusing on the donut. For us, it was always important, like this climate boundaries and also the social foundation. And we were focusing from the very beginning with, on communities, because we thought there's a lot of knowledge in communities and people who know places, what they really want, how they want to live, what they need, and also for system change. And very interesting is also that when you're like 15 years in practice and you learn a lot about your clients, that most of the clients, you cannot change a system with the clients you get, basically. It's always the framing the client comes with. It's often the project developer, also municipalities. And the bugs there really lay in the governance system, and ownership models also, and in the money making. So we are really interested in like changing these ownership models from the base. And that's why we also started to build our own companies and become our own clients. Yeah, we stimulate a lot of rewilding processes also to develop new nature, come later to that, and really fight for housing for all. So what happens a lot in Germany already, in Zurich, was already mentioned, the Baugenossenschaften, the housing corporations, in our opinion, like one of the best systems for the housing crisis, but not yet so popular in the Netherlands, but we're getting there. Yeah, and circularity approach, we just started like from the very early stages working on that. These are some projects we did in the last 15 years. It's roughly, I think some of them you probably know. This is the Keuvel, like this cultural incubator in Amsterdam North, where we made this feed remediation park and put second-hand houseboats in this nature park to recycle. And another project we did was like the transformation of all these bridge houses in Amsterdam into a hotel. So we just started with these ideas and said, like, how can we reuse these buildings? Another project was Schoon Schip, which was like also a building group, and was like a woman. She had the idea to make the most sustainable floating neighborhood in the world or in Europe, and we helped her like working 10 years on that. Here's actually also like one building is built with straw, and the other one, which is I think not here in the picture, is also with hempcrete. First floating house on hempcrete. And then we do projects like this also in wood, already mentioned before. But we figured out basically in order to have more impact on projects, we have to be really involved in the very, very beginning of a project. And that's not the case when you're not the client yourself, or unless you find a really good client who gives you the right assignment, which is not often the case if you really want to change the system. So we started from the very beginning to initiate our own ideas, to invest in them, find money and finances, and understand the system of financing also, but also accelerating these ideas and projects. And often when you have a project, the project starts and ends. We're thinking now more into designing ventures, new companies, how to just have more impact even. And that's basically, yeah, it's a quote we strongly believe in, that it's so difficult in practice to change the system. We are confronted with that every day. Even if you have the highest ambition, it's often not possible to change the system within the real estate practice. And I think for the practitioners, I think, who are trying to bend this system, yeah, it's really hard work and very frustrating and not working often. You just touch upon very, very little changes. So we said we have to completely set something next to it from scratch. That's what we are doing since more or less 4 years. And we called that our space and matter parallels, because we're already in our space and matter and time naming. So today I just quickly, briefly go through a couple of these ideas. One of them was Sumuvala. It stands for Sun, Moon, Water, Land. It's a concept where we work also with academics together, like Gina Maffay and Koen Arts. They teach at Wageningen. And basically this whole idea about Sumuvala was that we approach and buy farmland and transform it into new nature and rewild it new nature. So not what Natuurmonumenten does or Staatsbosbeheer. They do it like, in our opinion, a bit too nice nature, like which you have to take still maintenance of. It's really creating wild nature. And here we work with and worked together with Bureau Stroming, and they're an expert on how to make that actually. And this is an area in Brabant which ARC is a foundation. They are like nature developers. What they do since 25 years, they buy farmland and transform it into a new nature and then sell it later to Natuurmonumenten or Staatsbosbeheer. And we are very triggered by them that they finance that by subsidies. But I'm personally very interested in what happens when the political climate changes and there's no subsidies for that anymore. Can we not just create like an economic engine to also basically transform this high value land, which only because we put like the value on it and a different function, it's so difficult to get it out of the market and devaluate it financially. So our idea was that we buy this land. This is an overview. And ARC did already an amazing job. So they bought this land already and rewilded it, 42 hectare. And they always strategically buy land in the Netherlands in order to connect natural corridors. And often these lands come with farms. So our idea was to partially demolish this farm, but start already with the community building. We have a strong community who are all these rewilders and would like to create and build, make new nature. And then the idea was to build very tiny bio-based houses in this area, and then stimulate more nature. So together with the community and also with our experts there, that new nature is created. So this very exploited, poisoned farmland is slowly translated and transformed into new nature. And then we have a lot of educational programming together with the University of Wageningen and these two experts and friends of us. And then after 15 years, because you don't get very quickly a permission for these projects, we said we only do temporal use for these recreational houses, and after 15 years we leave again, and then we leave new nature behind. And we unlocked the difficult problem of value price of I think 250 euro per square meter to €2 per square meter. We paid back by a recreational hospitality concept. And the idea was to just repeat this. And but there's no client who ever gives you this commission. So we thought we have to build our own company for that. So we were designing this whole company, which was steward-owned, where nature had also a voice in the company. So we were only busy with the legal stuff for a year to set up this company and the business model. And slowly we find also investors who invest in that. So there's little revenues you can make financially, but not a lot. But the best revenue is that you create new nature. And that's, in a way, how we approach these new ventures. So we set up these companies, find partners with that, and then do ground or land acquisition, find the money, build these houses. And these were some examples of how they could look. And funny enough, the idea was also to make them with hempcrete. So this is a movie of an architect who worked for me a while. She made a beautiful building also from hempcrete. And that process of not only the climate benefits it has, is also the communal aspect of it. It's very easy to build these houses, and it's very cheap and affordable because the material doesn't cost much, and the labor is very affordable if you do it with volunteers and the community itself. So I think schools are perfect typologies also for using this building system. Another venture we built was a tech platform. In the last 15 years, I think we developed together with housing, building groups, I think around 200 houses or something or more. And we figured out that it's often still for the privileged people. Often there are some architects involved who have a lot of knowledge about building and developing also. And we were always thinking that it would be great, in order to make this movement really big, it has to be very simple and very accessible to everyone. And there's a lot of challenges in this housing cooperation movement also. We talk to Coupling, to all these people, and they're not talking to each other, basically. There's a lot of initiatives who are now seeking for members in these fantastic projects also. And on the other hand, a lot of people are looking for houses, and there's no match. They just don't find each other. So we thought, why don't we just build this platform, this tech platform, and make more of this possible. So these are all different housing forms collectively built. And the housing typology really doesn't matter. There's projects in transformed churches, on old farms, high rises, on buildings which stand on their head, upside down, for example, this farm, floating old schools, and so on. This is one we did in Amsterdam also. This was the group. And slowly now we are succeeding with this because we just found an investor at the end of the last year. The first province is embracing this platform in order to also put places there and locations. So slowly we try to put the whole movement of CPO and housing corporations on one platform to make share knowledge, share templates, standardize. Because everyone says you cannot basically scale up project developments or community projects. And we are convinced of the opposite. Because I think every project is very customized, it's very local. You cannot scale up, but you can spread. I think there's a lot of initiatives out there who are seeking for help and knowledge on the one hand, but also for experts and architects who can help them, and for locations. And what we try to do is build this tech platform. And all of a sudden, since the beginning of the year, I'm just focusing on that. And trained as an architect, I have no clue about a tech platform, but we got the right partners on board, and they're very experienced with that. But it's very funny that you change really, I mean, basically every year I change my profession. So last year I think was pretty much a project developer, and this year I'm working in a tech platform. I do less and less like the original architecture, what was described before already. And that was also an approach last year I did, where I thought like we can always repeat projects from project to project, but what if we have concepts which can be repetitive? So is there an option for a housing problem, for example? There's a lot of farms being like sold now, and farmland also in the Netherlands, and there's a housing crisis, especially in the rural countryside, where a lot of like starters and seniors, they're looking for houses and want to stay in the villages, they want to stay in their community, but there's not much offered, so they have to move out, and these villages will shrink and the facilities will disappear. So we thought, can we not provide them also these housing communities on farms? So can we transform old farms into that? Also here, I pitched that idea to an impact investor, and he was thrilled by the idea to say, how can we repeat that? So I built this whole concept. We made this website. We made standard designs also, especially for getting grip on the typology, but also on the costs and on approaching this land. So at the end here, we also shaped a company around it, where we said we buy this land ourselves. We are the developer, we are the financial partner, we are the architect, and we are the community manager, and we are the circularity expert. So we try to put everything in this project from A to Z, and then made all these templates in order to very quickly ask for building permissions at the municipalities in order to repeat fast. And that's not only because of economic reasons, because the system has a lot of bugs in there. If you want to buy land, you have to be very fast. This market goes so fast that within a couple of days, you have to know if such a project is valid and economical feasible. If you then hire an architect, like the old practice, they work for 2 months on a design, you're just too late. You cannot crack the system. So we're always diving into this system and trying to analyze what's needed, and then work with partners, basically. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Sasha. I'd like to invite Tatjana, Emma, and Sasha onto the stage. I'm going to ask one question, and then I propose we open it up to the audience, because we're a little bit running late and people have to change trains. So maybe one question, this one's that hasn't been talked about so much is risk-taking and support structures. If I guess all of you could maybe talk about that. So I think, Tatjana, you from the observations of others, but also in education. Emma, maybe also something from the perspective of a student. And Sasha, you already hinted at it, but maybe you could add some more. So I don't know, let's start.
Risk in academia, you mean, or?
Yeah, well, I think what we're talking about today is a lot of practices that are imagining something. I think what you're showing in the Architecture is Climate platform is practices that are imagining something. So that requires a certain amount of risk-taking. It requires a certain support system, or there is an absence of that support system. And I think we celebrate, I think, in this exhibition, also in this room, all these efforts. But I think what is also important to talk about is the risk that people took and how much extra work, how much extra effort that was to practice in a different way and to be able to voice that. And I can imagine that also in academia, those risks exist. So if you could share some thoughts on that.
Well, it's really, really difficult, I think, no? In academia, I mean, what kind of risk do I have, really, no? In a way, no? And because it's not the real world, right? No, as you were saying, no? Because no, I'm a civil servant, no? I would have to do something really bad in order to lose my job. So I think in a way it's for me, no, sort of. Yeah.
But are you then the support system?
I'm the support system, I would say. No, I'm the person to fall back onto. No, sort of I'm the person to take the financial risk. I'm the person who sort of signs the contracts. I'm the face. I'm the legal person. Sort of I'm the fallback guy. No, sort of no. I'm there for others to sort of maybe. I don't know. I make plenty of mistakes myself. No, but I think there's this. No. I'm the person, yeah, others can rely on, I guess, hopefully.
But I would almost argue you do more, because I think with an effort like Architecture is Climate, you're giving voice to the risk takers. You are elevating them to a point saying this practice is taking those steps. And this practice is envisioning something that we all need in order for this transformation.
I think I don't want to really talk about them as risk takers, no, in a way, because I think they're realists, no, in many ways. Of course, they're taking a step, and they're sort of also questioning what many others would, no, consider sort of standard practices, no. But in a way, yes, no, there is this voice giving, no, but there's also maybe at the same time, whilst doing so, building up other networks and trying to understand what others might need in order to take similar steps, no, to understand professional practice and how you could support students also to take similar steps, no, how do you build up social enterprises, other kind of enterprises, who do you, no, put in touch, and these kind of things, no? But I leave it there.
Yeah, actually, about the difference between academia and practice, because at the Academy of Architecture we have students that are and practicing and studying at the same time, and what you can really see is actually, for a lot of people, there's really almost a separation between the studying self and the practicing self. And you see a lot of, or that was some things that it's very empirical observations, huh? But I could see in a lot of students this very idealistic of the practice in the studies. So this risk-taking ability, or just trying to challenge the status quo, and take on a lot of risks in project, often also encouraged by the teachers. But when you would talk to the same students about their practice, they would be like, oh yeah, but I would never propose something like this to my client because I know I wouldn't agree. Or so there's almost a sort of, this missing link, like finding the tools to actually bringing this, those ideal or those values into argumentation, to bring them into the practice. And that's really something at the academy for me that was quite visible, actually, this shift. And just to relate it about the movement around Paris, I think what we've seen a lot is that public institutions have supported and are also helping those kind of bottom-up movement to scale up by the financing through like the schools projects, through the public housing cooperation, and that's also connected to the fact that the private market on some practices wouldn't be willing to take the risks, actually, where public institution would be actually willing to take the risks. So that they kind of made the sort of initial investment that were necessary to start on building those new networks of stakeholders to source the materials, to implement them, that the private market wouldn't be willing to do, and that actually had really a sort of impact on the whole movement.
Do you want to add? Or?
I think so how I experienced academia was like really a safe space, and I wouldn't say it's like taking a lot of risks, but I, for example, also maybe yes, I think because you can also, there's a lot of expectations in academia, right? There's professors who want basically there's a lot of expectations, let's put it like this. And I think if you completely go off that path and experiment and try out and really innovate and really try out something and fail a lot, that's taking a lot of risk, right? Like getting bad grades and maybe not respected and so on. But in general, I think it's quite a safe haven, right? But then I think what's interesting to see is like if the students who are very creative in academia then go into practice, and I often see this as really two different worlds, especially when they start in an office. Then it really depends on which office, of course. But there's like these students who do side projects, and then they become very risky again. You know, they try really to risk a lot with their project, but they need a bit of this security system to fall back on something, right?
Yeah, I'm also I'm really enjoying the how loaded the word risk is also as well in this conversation as well. While in essence, it's kind of we encourage our children to take risk. We encourage them not to fear the world. Yet at the point that we get to the higher levels of education where we are into profession, we are already so guarded in terms of we don't want to take it's already a negative. While I think it's where we are now, our practice and our education system actually needs that attitude again of being that advocate for various forms and various ways of thinking, which was also kind of part of the discussion earlier today. Yeah. I'd like to jump to the audience because we really don't have that much time. I don't know if anybody has a question for us or wants to pivot the conversation in some way.
Maybe I can just quickly share while you're taking risk. What I find very inspiring while listening to this, in the exhibition we actually have quite some academics that are starting to produce works that we can experience. I'm talking people like Daniel Barber, Nick Axel, we have Eyal with the forensics people, of course we have Mold. I'm really intrigued by this shift towards performance, towards moving matter, towards... There's something happening about, I mean, that is very encouraging that maybe, you know, breaking out of the book or out of the classroom or out of the theory.
Can I put it the other way around?
Please do.
Really interesting. I'm getting a bit itchy about this conversation, about academics becoming these suddenly daring people, sort of going into the real world and suddenly experiencing risk or something like that. I think what I find really interesting is that so many practitioners are actually daring to come into research. No, I mean, it's the other way around actually that I find interesting. No, that for very long, I think research was something really dirty in a way. No, and you wouldn't really do it. But suddenly you find quite a lot of practitioners and quite a lot of people who are understanding the value also of sort of in-depth investigations into materials, into governance systems, into other kinds of structures. And this is, I think, the much more fundamental shift for me that I see now. That's actually, sort of this dabbling or suddenly this engagement with science, this engagement with sort of, I mean, Anat Singh is everywhere, right? And other bits and pieces. So things we couldn't really imagine quite a few years ago, it's coming into practice. And this, I think, for me, is the really interesting shift.
Fair enough.
And so are those the practices that are in your 150?
I would say so. No?
Yeah.
I think it's much more to do with understanding the complexities, trying to unravel those complexities and maybe making those understandable as well, and maybe trying to make those teachable in a sense as well, sort of showing what's out there.
I have a question on this side.
I just want to thank you, Tatiana, for your wonderful lecture, for all the lectures today, actually. But I was wondering, how do you implement this, what you now are saying, into your teaching? Is it about value systems? Is it about tools, methods? Is it opening up students towards other ways of dealing with practice? I was really, as a teacher in the school with only the 10 credits that you have available, what do you do very concretely?
Everything, right? Yeah. So we talked a lot about architectural canon before, and it's very different. What I do now, I start with the contemporary conditions, the multiple crises, and try to understand them by doing deep dives. And this is then obviously interconnected. That's lectures, but there's also seminars and other bits and pieces. But it's multiple engagements and quite a lot of engagements with people who have out in the world and doing these kind of things. So it's multiple entries, no? Sort of always in contact and always situated, but always bringing it back also into academia and no, taking it out there again, trying to create conversations and situations. No?
There's a question up here.
I would like to a bit follow up on the support system and the huge gap between practice and academia. As a young professional, I personally quit my job a few months ago and decided also to become brave and trying to develop my own stuff. But I absolutely don't feel any support system. And I see also the difference after finishing my master, having huge amount of friends, joining the office, however good office is, 3-4 years, having a burnout, depression, becoming IT designer, yoga teacher, whatever, just absolutely living the field, being very talented, very inspiring, very engaged into the world and transformation. But I miss the understanding of what's the support system and how actually we should build up and encourage those people in taking the risk, but also having understanding how the risk can be structured into the exact action. So I would like to, already from your inspirational lecture, listen more about this.
Do you want to direct that question to anybody specifically, or?
Maybe all three of you. I think that's also interesting, different angles.
Yeah. So there is no support system in practice. That's how I experience it. I think you have to create that yourself, and I think you can also be a part-time yoga teacher and still do amazing work next to that. But I think this is really that's what I mean. This is really real life. Taking a lot of risk, setting up all these companies and trying out, is burning a lot of money, burning a lot of energy, and failing all the time. This is what happens. And I think really a lot of stuff which I've shown didn't work out yet, and that's really burning a lot of time, and it's very frustrating. And how to support that? Yeah, you have to be very creative with that. You have to find somehow a lifeline. And it would be fantastic if we have a basic income in the Netherlands, so we are all able to reveal all these talents of all the people, but we don't have that. But I think such a system would be fantastic. But we don't have that, and I think everyone has to be creative to create that. What I see is that often architects most of the architects, they're trained like change makers. They come out of practice and then they don't have that support system and it ends. What I see now is we are approached often, because I have a variety of companies, by legal advisors, people who really in the commercial world made a lot of money, and they now say, oh, we want to do some change. And they give up their old jobs. I see it really plenty of times. But they have this buffer of now trying out for 2 or 3 years something else. So they first had to go extremely commercial in order to have this support system. Architects often don't have that unless they come from a good family. Purely from practice speaking. So.
Yeah, we witnessed last night the launch of ACAN, Netherlands, no? Architects Climate Action Network. There was also present Peggy Diemer and the Architects Lobby. There were a lot of people, about 30 people in the room, who all talked about different support networks. They exist in practice also. No? They might not be as obvious and not as clear, but they are there and they're growing. It's, I think, I know, maybe we have a conversation about that as well, but I think it's also about this kind of question about unionizing, what Peggy talked about last night, getting together and building that up. It's quite shocking to see that it does not exist. There's tiny sprouts, I think, that do exist, but I think it's for us to keep them also, to make them bigger and maybe connect them also with other support networks, right? The academic ones and so on and so forth, and really take care of these structures.
Yeah, because I almost wonder whether the network within academia, it's one of the closest knit networks and the most obvious networks of support system that exists within architecture.
And maybe this is also maybe a call to us also to open these networks up more, no? And to make space also for these other kind of questions to come in.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think in practice there is not such a network of architects. It's really smaller circles often, but from like in academia, there's really strong networks of architects. That's what I also experience. But in practice, like architects don't meet usually, not so often. But in academia, a lot in a way. There's at least in the Netherlands how I experience it. And there's like smaller circles of architects who have these smaller networks. But I think it would be a fantastic support network also if academia helps starting architects also more.
If I can add on to that, maybe the support system is not only amongst architects, but it can be also through the whole chain of stakeholders and finding the people that are addressing the same topics, and that can be, and it can be, maybe the support system can be per project. And what I thought was really interesting on the opening day of the IABR, the curatorial team came up with this word of alliances, and that's something that fits a lot in some project that we found around Paris, where you see that because it's new practices, because they're embedded in they're not embedded in the conventional system, so new collaboration have to be found, new ways of working together, new people have to be found, and new knowledge has to be created because people don't know yet how to work with those materials or those techniques. So actually the whole kind of community that is built up around the project can be also a support system in itself, that the designer is not only in a sort of one-man show, that it becomes a much more collective process overall.
Yeah. And because I know that in the Paris case, there is a lot of attention being paid in how to educate and kind of transfer knowledge on working with these materials within the professional field. Is there also an alliance with educational systems and academia?
I know that it's really connected to primary schools. There's a lot of initiatives where also the city of Paris itself organizes a lot of workshops. There's a lot connected within the field of builders and architects. With academia, I'm not sure if it's directly connected through official, but I know amongst the students there's really strong movements. We heard a lot of architects saying actually young architects don't want to work with conventional materials anymore, so they kind of are one of the factors that push this movement.
Okay. I think we have to wrap it up.
I have, yes, this moment where people start to leave because they need to get the last train.
Yes,
I want to say to Tatjana, it was just a sort of to pinpoint. I surround myself with a lot of research. So for me, doing is knowing and knowing is doing. And I find it such a beautiful position where we're in that it's becoming a bit dirty. These lines are not, they're porous. There's something happening on all of that. We didn't touch all the topics we want to talk about, but we did really, I think, lay the ground for further conversations on where our practice will move towards. For those of you who can't get enough of the conversation around climate and architecture, we have a content-driven book launch on Sunday at 2 o'clock on It's About Time, where Veronique will also be one of the speakers. I wholeheartedly thank all of you for being here. The exhibition is on display until October 13th. And again, in the spirit of generosity, the bar is closed. But for those who care to share a drink, there's a nice bar on that side of the building called Westkop, where I'll at least have one and maybe be able to give a few rounds. Did I forget anything besides asking for applause for both Lily Carr, Jana Bijstik for both the content of this marvelous program, but of course the speakers of the third panel. Give it up also for Emma, Tatjana and Sasha.
Maybe I add one more footnote to the day, I must say I was really inspired and energized by the. We had a lot of people from academia today speaking, but your energy is inspiring. So yeah, thank you for giving a glimpse and sharing with us today, and kind of engaging us in your conversations. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I think it was very good to share it in this format, not just behind closed doors in our own bubbles, but also to see so many practitioners in the audience joining us tonight. So thank you as well.